Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. In a shock development, South Africa's Finance Minister failed to deliver what was meant to have been the first budget since the formation of the Government of National Unity. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss the implications. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
What led to this failure and how serious is it?
Well, the proximate cause is definitely the 2 percentage point VAT increase to 17%. That was a big shock. It had been sort of signalled in the recent weeks, but it really wasn't on the radar, I'd say even a month ago. But it came into, and there were leaks, which is also a shock because we don't usually have leaks from Cabinet, but there were leaks ahead of this budget. So it came into the public domain, but there was a feeling that they could navigate this and that maybe that the GNU had agreed. But as the budget came closer and closer, the message from some of the parties was that there was no way they were going to accept a tax hike. So that was the proximate cause. The more, the sort of longer term cause, I suppose, this is the first budget of the Government of National Unity. So there's a number of parties, it's no longer just the ANC. And the ANC has always treated the Treasury as a special department since going back to the days of Nelson Mandela, where, there was, it really, what it said was taken very seriously, and generally it persuaded Cabinet to bend to its will. And so that was different. And when you ask about the seriousness, very serious, because, we've got a highly credible budget process. It takes about a year to get this budget together. We win international awards for transparency. We're right up there in terms of our budget setting process. And there's a few world-class things in South Africa that we like to keep in cotton wool. So the Springboks being one, Banyana, and I think in government, the National Treasury. So if this leads to an erosion of trust in the National Treasury, both inside the country and people can see the budget process as a place to do political horse trading, it's very, very serious. And then obviously the implications are, when the Treasury spoke to international bondholders and to the markets, generally there was a lot of trust. What they said would generally go. And this time that isn't what happened. It's a major blow potentially to the credibility. There is a chance in the next few weeks to recover that quite quickly and to get to consensus. But the ball is definitely now in the GNU Cabinet's court.
What fiscal picture has emerged?
Well, the fiscal picture is bleak, so we know we're highly indebted as a country. It's around that 76% of GDP, debt to GDP. It's a very, very high ratio. We've sort of uncharted territory in democratic South Africa. The government deficit has widened because the spending pressures are still there, we're trying to contain our borrowing, and the big change is that the revenue is not coming in. We've had a few windfalls or unexpected developments over the last few years that have really bailed us out. The windfall around commodity prices that helped get in higher corporate taxes a few years ago. We had the GFECRA thing which helped us bail out the last year. So we didn't have any of those windfalls this time. So the deficit now, is talking about a 5% deficit, which is higher than we were budgeting for this time last year. So the picture is bleak, and there's sort of the levers, are also, unclear, to improve it. The budget that was presented, that would have been presented, that wasn't, would have helped, peak that debt to GDP and start a trajectory of decreasing the deficit. So it wasn't a bad budget, if you look at the numbers. It showed, it had a trajectory, it was credible, I think, in terms of starting to deal with those big bad ratios that remain in the budget. But without growth, ultimately, and I think there was a view that the first GNU government was going to be all about growth. We saw the State of the Nation address was about setting this audacious target of 3% growth. Now, Treasury does, in its budget documents, does look at those scenarios, how we use the reforms, especially in the rail and electricity sector and water, to try and get that growth going again, get private sector investing in infrastructure, get the infrastructure spend up, get the investment juices flowing back into the economy, which has been absent. So it does look at getting to higher levels of growth, but it's not the base. No finance minister at this stage is going to rely on higher growth. We've just been in this low growth trap for over a decade. So you can't rely on higher growth. So the growth that was outlined in the budget is nowhere near that 3% target. So this was not about a growth budget. This was about can we send out a credible budget at this time for bondholders, for the rating agencies, and to show that we're serious about using macroeconomic stability as one of the pillars for future growth. If you don't have that in place, you can't grow. And or really fiscal stability, it's one of the pillars of future growth. And this was about setting in that pillar in place and saying, yes, there are these reforms happening in the background, which are very important, and there was a lot of discussion in the documents about those reforms to get that growth, but without this fiscal balance coming right, that's going to be a drag on growth, and we need to get it right. So I think that's what the focus of this budget was about. The tax increase, changing those ratios that are really bad. That was really the message that was going to be sent out in the budget. That wasn't.
What trade-offs will Cabinet now consider for the new budget to be delivered on March 12?
Yeah, well, there are only three trade-offs. So there's the VAT hike, which some parties are saying it's a red line. Most parties are very unhappy with. All the parties in the GNU are not happy with this tax increase. You've got local government elections coming up, not too distant future. This is not a time. This is not what politicians like to do. They don't want additional taxes. But he's made the inconceivable conceivable. That's what Minister Godongwana has done by putting it out there. He tried to get it through. It was a big roll of the dice that failed. He tried to push it through, but there was a pushback before he could table. So that was a very potentially damaging, but they can claw back credibility of the Treasury. So it's on the table. Whether I don't think 2 percentage points, but is there now a negotiation that could happen around maybe having half that, say a percentage point VAT hike, with all the documentation showing all the additional zero rating on foodstuffs that would accompany that. So that might be acceptable I don't know if it's acceptable, but it might be something that would be considered now. And along with maybe not holding back on the fuel levy hike. So they were going to keep that flat and maybe not changing the brackets as they were going to do, and maybe not giving an above inflation increase for grants. Those sort of things could be with the 1 percentage point. It's unlikely because of the red lines that have been drawn and the backlash against the VAT, but he's made the unimaginable imaginable, I suppose, by putting it in the speech and having the journalists and the economists that were in the lockup having seen it, and it's now very much in the public domain. So it will be part of the discussion, I think, having something of a VAT hike. But then the other two levers are very unattractive. Are we going to borrow more? We've already got a debt to GDP ratio, which is seen as unsustainable. At the moment, 22 cents in every rand that's in the budget is for debt repayments. That's just going to increase, and it's an intergenerational issue. This is debt that we're taking on now for our children. So it's a very serious thing to just carry on taking on more debt. Obviously, it's always politically more expedient to take on more debt than to raise taxes, but it's not necessarily politically responsible. So that should be a red line, but we'll have to see. If we decide to borrow more, we must expect a backlash from the markets, and that's going to come through probably in ratings decisions in the form of what the view people take about the rand, because we have a consolidation strategy, and if we continue taking on debt, we're not going to be able to meet that fiscal consolidation strategy. So it would be a U-turn on that strategy, and it has major implications and serious implications. So will we take on more debt? That is one option. And then the third one, which is seemingly attractive, is to cut spending. Now, but where do you cut? And it's going to be a very big debate within Cabinet about where to cut. It was interesting, ahead of the budget, many of those ministers that were wanting more, not less. So we've also putting in new services. We want grade R, rolled out universally. How are we going to fund that? 19,000 teachers' jobs are set to be on the line at the moment without having any increase. And there's a number of other services. We're wanting to improve the rail service, etc. That needs money. The VAT increase would have brought nearly 60 billion rand into the coffers, and if it was sustained, obviously it's sustained for a long time. It's in the base. So cuts are, especially in the way we do our budget process. It takes almost a year. So all the departments have their wish lists. They go through this process. They go through cabinet committees. So you kind of there's already been the pushback against the additional expenditure. That's already happened. It's happened months ago. So who is going to be prepared around that cabinet table to put up their hand and say, I'll take the cut? I can't see it as it's not an easy trade-off. So, but those are the three. Either you've got the VAT hike or some form of VAT hike or some form of tax increase, but the others, corporate income tax and personal income tax, aren't going to bring in the money that the VAT would. So I don't think those are really realistic. Raising more debt, which is going to have serious implications from our attractiveness, from our strategy perspective, or cutting. Who's going to put their hand up? It's going to be interesting to see.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News Daily email newsletter.